Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. How to be inefficient and still reach your goals. This sounds like a bit of an oxymoron. If the title of this podcast piqued your interest and you're potentially thinking this is clickbait, I'm here to tell you that it's not. Anyone who knows me in my personal life will probably say that I'm an incredibly inefficient person with the way I go about things. Now, naturally, I've got many episodes on what I'm doing to increase my efficiency, but also my effectiveness, which I talk about in the episode on compound interest. But in this particular episode, I'm going to address the technique that I've used countless times to get things done while still being a very inefficient individual. And it's a concept that I like to call area under the curve. Now, I came up with this concept in university in my final year as a way to explain to my peers how they could increase their output and get more done. The reason that I came up with it was that these particular individuals who I was trying to convey this concept to were extreme procrastinators. Now, we all procrastinate, including me, and I procrastinated heaps during university. But there would be this incredible manifestation of procrastination which was unparalleled in particular individuals. And naturally, we all want to help our friends. If they're not doing well, we will try to provide guidance where possible. Now, whether that guidance was heeded a few years ago when I was in university is irrelevant. Today, I'm going to try and explain this concept to you as best as I can in audio format. Naturally, I would love to be standing in front of you with the whiteboard and be drawing out graphs, because that makes a concept such as area under the curve much easier to explain. So all I ask for this episode is that you put your thinking caps on and start imagining the scenarios as I tell them to you. So imagine that I've given you a goal, and your goal is to drive to a destination that's 200 kilometers away from you. Now, it's going to be very simple. You just know that if you drove 100 kilometers per hour for 2 hours, you would get to your destination. It's very simple mathematics. Drive 100 kilometers per hour for 2 hours, and you've driven 200 kilometers, provided you're going in the right direction and there's a straight road, and you've reached where you need to get to. Now, in reality, if you've ever driven a car or you've been on public transport, a train or a bus, you will know that we generally do not travel at a consistent speed for our whole journey. Now, taking that example and making it a little bit more complex, what might have potentially happened was, in the first hour of your journey, you drove 150 kilometers per hour. And in the second hour of your journey, you encountered some traffic and you only got to travel at a speed of 50 kilometers per hour. So in the first hour, you traveled 150 kilometers. And in the second hour, you traveled 50 kilometers. Your average speed is 100 kilometers per hour across the 2 hours. And you've reached your destination, which was 200 kilometers away. So hopefully I haven't lost you. Now, when you map this journey out, we can map it on a graph that has two axes. In our vertical axis, we're going to have speed, which is in kilometers per hour. And on my horizontal axis, I'm going to have time, which in this case is in hours. So in primary school mathematics, you might have learned that to calculate a distance, you take the speed and you multiply it by the time that was spent traveling at that speed. Integration as a concept in mathematics is when we have a curve, when we have a function, we can find the area under the curve within particular bounds. So if we look at our journey starting at 0 hours till 2 hours, and we find that the change in speed, that, the varying speeds that we took over our journey to get to our destination, when the area under that curve is equivalent to 200 kilometers, that means we reached our destination. Now imagine if your goal was to get to that destination 200 kilometers away, and I told you, you have to get there today. And that was the constraint. I gave you a particular deadline to reach that destination. And I want you to imagine that you're now driving your car. You know that it doesn't matter what speed you drive at right now, but overall, when you look at your average speed and the time that you spent driving, overall that needs to be 200 kilometers. So your area under the curve needs to be 200 kilometers. Now imagine that you're driving, you start your journey in the morning and there's not much traffic. Maybe you start at 6 a.m. in the morning, and when you start your journey, you're traveling at 150 kilometers per hour. It's brilliant. But in 30 minutes, all of a sudden there's a traffic jam, and the maximum speed you can travel drops from 150 kilometers per hour down to 10 kilometers per hour. Now, the other thing you know is that you live in a city where there's a lot of traffic jams. So you know that this traffic jam is going to be in existence for the next 8 hours of the day. And for the next 8 hours, the maximum speed you can travel is 10 kilometers per hour. So you might say that there's too much traffic now. I'm going to park my car on the side of the road, and I'm not even going to bother driving. And if you chose to do that, well, you're going to drive the first 150 kilometers, you're going to drive 150 kilometers for half an hour, which means the area under the curve in the first half hour is going to be 75 kilometers. And then for the next 8 hours, you're going to do nothing. You're going to park your car on the side of the road and sit there until traffic improves and you can drive faster. So you got nowhere. You're stuck at 75 kilometers and you know you have another 125 kilometers. Now, if you decided to sit in that traffic jam and travel at 10 kilometers per hour for the next 8 hours, you would have traveled 80 kilometers in that time, which brings you closer to your destination. Now, imagine that situation in your life and how ridiculous it would be if every time you encountered traffic and you couldn't travel at your maximum speed, that you decided to stop what you were doing. And this is what the area under the curve concept is all about. When I looked at my friend who would have been a master procrastinator and only did his work when he felt like he was working at his maximum output per hour. And generally, if somebody is a master procrastinator, they're also a perfectionist. So they only want to work when they're feeling the best and when their output per hour, their maximum output per hour is at its highest, when it's maxed out. And this is very similar to the analogy of driving the car and only wanting to drive the car if you're driving at top speed. And how ridiculous is that? Because if you had a journey to get to and all of a sudden you encountered a bit of traffic, would you in your life when you're driving a car, park your car on the side of the road and let the other cars pass you and say, you know what, traffic's not moving fast enough, therefore I'm going to sit on the side of the road, put my emergency lights on, and go nowhere? You wouldn't do that when you're driving a car. But the irony is, people do that when they're trying to achieve their goals. And in the context, if I look at an academic context where there was a particular deadline, so you had a time limit, just like I gave you in that example when you're driving a car, you had a destination to get to, so there's a particular criteria, something that you need to research, a certain number of words that you need to write in your thesis, and a certain format it needs to be presented in. And the big issue was a lot of people only decided to do the work when they felt good about doing the work and when they were the most productive. And when they weren't feeling productive, they'd give up. They'd essentially park their productivity cars on the side of the road and do nothing. And what I would do is I'd draw out a graph and I'd have on my vertical axis, I'd have my maximum output or my output per hour. And obviously you can normalize that by your maximum output per hour. So if, you can turn that into a percentage. And I'd say if these are the hours that me and you work in a day and I'd compare what they're doing and what I'm doing, I'd say I'm actually more inefficient than you most of the time. If I know that my best is 100%, that's my rate that I'm producing my work at, I'm saying that for majority of the day, I only felt like somewhere between 20 and 50%. So I'm barely hitting my 50% productivity. I decided to still do the work for majority of the day, where you waited until 11 p.m. when you all of a sudden had the motivation and the energy to work at 100% productivity, but you only did an hour of work. So even though I was more inefficient than you, my area under the curve, my volume of work is greater than yours. And that was always my argument to excessive procrastination. When you're thinking about your goals, focus on the area under the curve. Yesterday, I was at the library and I felt like this was the day where I had really bad productivity. I was feeling pretty shit. I was sick the day before. I was a bit sleep deprived. But I still went to the library and I stayed there for about 10 hours. And I wasn't particularly efficient. I wasn't fast. I knew I was operating at 30% of my capacity. But guess what? By applying that over that period of time, I achieved more than if I said I'm not feeling great today and I'm going to do nothing. My area under the curve is greater than the version of me in a parallel universe who decided to park my car on the side of the road because there's too much traffic. And you know that's ridiculous to do when you're driving a car. So why are you doing it in your real life? So think about, how are you sabotaging yourself? By choosing to only do your work when you're most efficient. In fact, if you spend more time getting your work done when you're feeling inefficient, you're actually going to reach your goals because your area under the curve is going to be much higher than the version of you in the parallel universe who waited until they were at their most efficient. And with that, I wish you great success with all your endeavors, and may you increase your area under the curve. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.